how's it going? Welcome aboard. And today we are going to be talking about, well, I've got Elize on here. So obviously when I've got Elize here, you know we're going to be talking about real estate and the legal aspect of the legal estate. But you all know that of late, the Prophet, yes, the Prophet, I did say that right. By the way, welcome Elize. How's it going?
Good, thank you.
I'm getting excited here. I'm forgetting my manners, and there you are. I haven't greeted you. We are going to be talking about the only one prophet who is kind of like a millionaire, almost a billionaire, and he's been on the news of late, and he also plays in real estate. But I thought let's bring in Elize and we can dissect some of the things that are being said out there in the media, and how does it actually connect into our world, which is real estate, and what can we learn from there? And I'm sure there's so many learnings that we can do. My name is TJ, Taurai Jack. Great having you around. And boom, let's go into it. If you don't know, there is a famous prophet, and Mail and Guardian has indicated that he is one of the wealthiest pastors in Africa. They labeled him, or should I say, they indicated that he is worth 150 million rand. No, it's not rands. It is 150 million USD. Did you get that one right, Elize?
That's a lot of money, hey? A lot of money.
I know lawyers don't really get excited with a lot of numbers, but it is still a lot of money. It is almost shy a $250 million from where we are sitting. And Prophet Bushiri, Shepherd Bushiri, he is one of our own here in South Africa. He stays here in an area called Midrand, or used to stay here because he's no longer in the country. And I've been following in some of the other snippets that's been happening. The social media was buzzing around him. But Elize, you are here today, and let us talk about, he's got a 5.5, or should I say, should I be talking in plural or in present? Because I don't know here. So we all know that there have been some serious allegations around home affairs. So there's some paperwork issues there, that's number one, and money laundering and all of those things. You read about it, it's out there in the newspapers. We're not here to talk about his case, but we're here to talk about, he's an investor, right? And me and you, we are investors. So we want to talk about what can we learn from other investors, whether they're falling or they're rising, because I think there's a point in case to always learning. I always say that in our team, we never lose anything. We are always consistently learning. Elize, I want to start this question by saying, do you know Prophet Shepherd Bushiri?
I think if you look at the newspapers, if you look at social media, it's hard not to know about him. He is all over the place. I think even jokes are already starting to come up. So yes, I think everybody should know at least of the name. But I've been following it quite a bit.
What do you like about him?
Well, I mean, clearly he's been very ambitious. You know, I did do a bit of criminal work, and I usually said, you know, sometimes it's good people making bad choices. Not that I'm saying anything that he did was right, but yeah. I mean, there's at least some creativity, and the more it comes about, you know, it's always amazing to see how people, you know, become very creative without sounding that I endorse anything that is criminal.
Awesome stuff. I was hoping that you're going to say you like his swagger, but definitely you're not going there. So maybe you're trying to protect your marriage, seeing that we're going over the holidays. It's all right, Elize.
I would say if my husband have dressed that smartly like he did, I mean, that would be always a big plus point.
Awesome stuff. Elize, let's jump into it. The Bushiris, they are here in Johannesburg, where you and me reside. They had a 5.5 million rand house. And the newspapers with everyone else, they reported that he has actually now forfeited that house. What does that mean?
Okay. TJ, I think one of the things that one has to firstly just go have a look at is and put it in context.
Yeah.
The house specifically that has been forfeited is part of the criminal matter.
Right.
Now, what it seems is, and without having access to the criminal, records and all of that, usually what could happen is if somebody is a flight risk, over and above the amount, I think they paid 400,000 bail money.
Yeah.
They also put
200
up the
each, I think it
property.
was.
Yeah. Plus, they put up the house as a surety to show them that they will not flee the country.
Right.
Now, in the criminal process, of course, they now didn't arrive. So, in that context, the court said, okay, now you're forfeiting your bail money and the house. So, that's in that context. So, what will happen is, of course, they will go auction it. But if there's a bond in place, the banks will be paid first. And if there's people that invested that money, then they will firstly do those claims. But now what is interesting, and I'm quite curious to see, because if there's money laundering allegations, the state will usually bring a separate civil application by the asset forfeiture. And what the asset forfeiture do is they go like really like veins, and they go and they look at all the assets. So what is going to be interesting is, because I'm quite sure the asset forfeiture already started with this process. And if they find that any of the money that is part of the complainant's money, the state actually in that application will try and get the money in order to, from the house, even in the criminal matter. So I think there's going to be, it's not going to be a straightforward, the state sells it, pay the bond and keep the money, because remember in criminal proceedings, that 400,000 goes to the government. It doesn't go to anyone, it doesn't go to the complainants or anything, it goes to the government. Where with the asset forfeiture, the focus is to take it back to make sure he doesn't reach, and then look at the complainants.
Well, if you didn't know about the Bushiris that we are talking about, so number one, the Bushiri themselves, or should I say Shepherd himself, Prophet Shepherd, he is said to be worth 130 million rand, US dollars, sorry, and he has had some interest, some quite interesting interest in many places. They're not like you and me, we're buying buildings in Joburg and doing student accommodations. No, they're doing big stuff. So for instance, they had some interest in a company, Eswatini, it's a construction company, and apparently King Swatini actually owns a bit of interest in it. It's in the news, you can go and check it out, it's online, it's not fabricated by Taurai Jack, it's there in the public domain. They have been said also to have interest in a chain. Chain is not 1, 2, ne? Chain is like long, right? It's like 5, 10, somewhere there. Hotels, they own hotels. Well, not hotels only in South Africa. They are one of their hotels, I think it's in the north and west, I think it's been said. But over and above that, they are said to be in Africa and Europe. So they are actually spending money in pounds, in euros. That's deep money, Elize, that we're talking about here, right? Yeah. So having gone into that, we actually understand, now we know who we're talking about. So let's come back at this, right? So this house now, in the event that this house was, let's say, in a company, right? So we are always advocating, when you're doing investments, do the right thing and invest in the right vehicles. And our favorite vehicle is, which we all use in our core team, is having a trust, under the trust of a company, and you kind of like own nothing, and you stay in the trust. In that instance, Elize, if that was the case, and this house here was in a company, what would have transpired?
Okay, so if the property was, they would not have per se used it in the criminal matter, except if they both were directors, which, say for example, they are both directors and they still use it because they hold all the shares. Now, this is where the Company Act really comes into play. And they actually say that if the directors are reckless, You know, they are reckless in their job. They're not acting. It's, for example, if even with a company and you are insolvent and you go and apply for a loan and you know you're not going to pay, that's reckless. Then you can pierce the corporate veil and you can go to the person's in person. If there's no proof, I mean, this is not a very likely thing. It's not to just go and pierce the corporate veil. You have to really show the negligence. If you can't show the negligence, then they can't pierce it. Then they can't take the property. So that's going to be one of the first things is, for example, as a forfeit in any of those shares, if they want to attach it in a company or a trust, they will have to prove first, the creditors, to say, no, these people were severely reckless. Or you can't just be accused of something. You have to actually be found guilty of something before you can pierce that corporate veil.
But there's something else that I've just learned here, Elize, in your conversations with me now, is that you mentioned the fact that they signed surety on the house, right? So which meant that if they gave him surety, they actually said, well, if ever we are to disappear, you can take that. They signed for that, right? So if it was in their personal capacity or in a trust or in a company, the fact that they've given consent, then the court should take it, isn't it?
Yeah. So definitely, I mean, I think the courts would not have accepted it if it wasn't a company and they were the only directors and the only shareholders, and it's only the two of them. If there was a third person, then the court would have asked specific permission from that person before even considering it. The court will not consider it and put any innocent party at risk.
100%. I want to dive into another conversation here, Elize. We all know that, or should I say, the newspapers, they have reported to say that they had interest in a number of things, in oil, in real estate, in hotels, and all of these things, right? Now, if they were running their businesses in a business, because there's companies here that have been mentioned here in all of these, I now want to kind of like bring it home a little bit to say, let's assume that I also found something quite interesting whilst I'm talking to you now, which is that the prophet's name is Joseph and his wife's name is Mary. You know, the irony of that, Joseph and Mary. So I'm like, okay. But nonetheless, for some of you Christians out there, you probably got the job. But nonetheless, Joseph and Mary, it looks like they've been directors for most of their companies and things like that. If they were handling their business, this is now outside their primary home, the 5.5 million. So they've now forfeited not 5.5, but they've actually forfeited 5.9 million. They're like, it's okay. Yeah, like, I mean, me and Elize, that's kind of like we put everything that we have and, you know, it's kind of like just give it to the state, there you go. You know, you can have it. That's what has happened here, is it? With just that case. But we don't know over and above that now, some of their assets that they have, but they're saying that he's worth 150 million. So for that now, Elize, I want to ask you the question to say, so can the government, or should I say the entire case as it unwrangles and things like that, if there is companies, properties in companies or in trust, how far can they go and recoup from those structures?
So I firstly want to start with what they most probably will do, and then we'll get to if they, you know, if it's going to be successful. But I think, and out of my previous experience, what the state will do is they will go and attack absolutely everything. Right. So yeah, if they've got shares in a company, and that company owns one property, they will immediately go and attach the property to make sure that nobody goes and sells that property because they've got an interest in it. And
hold on there, Elize. I want to, you know, I'm a simple guy. I generally want to understand. When you're saying that they will attach the property, we all know that the property is a physical thing that stays somewhere else, right? So attaching, it doesn't mean that they're going to pick it up. So let's assume they own a building in an area that me and you like to invest in Johannesburg, CBD, right? So they attach that building. What does that mean to the physical property? Is there anything that is significant that changes on the actual property?
No. What does happen is they will go and register an interdict against the title deed. So
Right.
that means that nobody will be able to sell that property. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I mean, if it's a building, there's most probably rental collections.
Right.
They will then proceed to take over that function. So they will say, listen, you're no longer going to pay X. You now, from now on, we have appointed Y, and they will collect the money because that money should come to the state at this stage and pay all the expenses to make sure that dear Joseph doesn't get any benefit at this stage from that. So it's twofold. So the actual building is still going to be there. I think I'm quite worried. I don't know if there's going to be any maintenance, but they've got to make sure that any money that comes in, that they take control of that, and that nobody can sell all that property, because that's going to be the most important thing. Because if the moment you sell that property to an innocent third party, I mean, the property is most probably going to be lost. And you don't want that.
Elize, speaking to that, there was a syndicate of guys that were hovering in an area not far from the Windsor areas, and they would come into a building and they would say, we are from government, what, and we are now taking over the building. And people would then, some would panic, some would call the owners, and then some owners who are obviously there would then actually know that their building is being hijacked, right? So there are certain people out there who knows of these processes, who then use them to benefit themselves, and then they start collecting money, whereas they're not even from the government at all, right? And I've seen that this is how some buildings get hijacked, especially where poor maintenance is, especially where poor security is, especially where the investor is absent, right? And for that reason, I actually wanted to bring this, Elize, in conversation, because I think that criminals are also just like you and me. They follow these stories. They might also have some access to all of these assets, and all of a sudden, before the government, or should I say the state, gets to those places, they can even execute some of those things, and it's now a case on top of another case. I mean, that has happened. It's not new in the courting system, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely too. I think it's opportunity. I mean, if an opportunity presents themselves, and as you say, I mean, the people aren't absent. There's no real proper management, and they take physically control. I mean, usually many of them, if they don't stay in one of the flats themselves, they have their people staying there,
100%.
and so, and if you don't cooperate, they make you, they're very intimidatory. I know about hijackers that sort of took a gun and stood by the gate, and they decided who leaves and who comes in and comes out, and they collected. Their rent collection was very well with the gun in hand. And usually with that as well, as they know that the police is not going to interfere, which is quite sad. Because if it reached that extreme, your local police, I don't want to say that some of them aren't very honorable, but usually they don't really get involved. That's why actually the government created the anti-hijacking unit that specialize in this, because they realize this is a much more extensive and difficult to take. And that's why it's so important, if you take a property, you have to make sure that if something looks like somebody wants to start hijacking, take the steps immediately. I mean, many owners go, no, I'm going to try and solve it myself. I want to save money. And then they lose the whole building. Because it's like a wildfire. It's very hard to contain. In Windsor, there were some people that could keep the hijackers out, and there's people that lost their buildings. It's all about how involved you are and how ready and how alert you are.
100%. Elize, I want to come back to Joseph and Mary. It's my fascination now, Joseph and Mary. with Joseph and Mary, if we go back to their story now and we see ourselves in them as investors, because they also went out there and invest with others and things like that. And I almost want to say, if they had some form of structures like these ones, Elize, you indicated that there's different system within the state and from a law perspective, how they can actually trace to see where did this money go to, what was it used for, and it goes back to all the way to be traced to point A to point B, right? My question to you now, Elize, which is rounding off here, is from an investor perspective, some of us are young investors. If I look at what Joseph and Mary are doing in terms of building their portfolios, what can we learn from this court case? I mean, it's huge, right? There's lots of things intertwined. There is politicians who are also involved in here and things like that. But what is it that we can learn from them? On top of your mind, the three things that we should be learning from them. Because again, we did say that either we learn or we don't lose, and we learn from people that are going up and people that are also going down. And we're not saying that either Mary or Joseph, they're going up or going down. We're just saying that it's a case that we can learn from. Three things at least that we can learn from them.
I think as an investor, I think if you invest, always make sure that you get paperwork to support whatever you do.
Right.
You know, I think even everybody, it's so easy if somebody says, TJ, invest in me, give me 100,000, you can trust me, you know who I am. Okay, they'll give you the money. But if I'm not able to give you the documentation and give those bases and be able to feed feedback, then you must know there's something wrong. If you look at all of the scandals and there's usually an admin problem. You know, people can't give feedback or turn around. I think that's the one thing that's really popping up in my mind, because I'm quite sure that people invested and throw money at them because they are Joseph and Mary. And I mean, nobody's going to ask a pastor, but yeah, can I get an agreement to confirm what we agreed on? You know, I think they relied on their words. So I think that's one of the things that I really popped up in my mind. The second thing is still to have the structures. If, say, for example, we have the company and the trust, and they were the other shareholder or part of it, you want to make sure that you are protected, that you know that your stuff is, so even if you personally get liable, for example, the other trustees or the other shareholders can't be prejudiced about what they did if they can show they didn't know about it. I mean, for example, if they had a building and they sold it and they made profit, that profit you can't, if it's linked to the growth of the building, the improvements, the state can't take that because that is legitimate profit. But it's the actual money or the loss that they have to recover. So that's the second thing, is still keep with your structures. Never, you know, don't make it easy for somebody to come and try and take something, because they'll have to jump through the hoops and they have to prove what they allege. And I think the third one overall also is do your homework, you know, and maybe don't, you know, be involved in more than one project. You know, different types of things is also a good thing. You know, what I like about it is we've got student accommodation, we've got your multi-use units. It's different types of projects. So everything is not in the same thing. So it's different ways to assess it. So I think that's the three things that really pops up in my mind.
My top number one is, if I can take anything to learn, I didn't know Joseph Bushiri before this, actually. I started knowing him maybe about 6 months ago. And that was when they started talking about him quite a lot on the social media and the news. That's when I actually knew him. I didn't know of churches and all of those things. I don't know. And I like his flamboyance, man. I like him. I like the way he dresses. One day when I grow up, I want to dress like that too, man. Maybe just for one day.
Please, only one day.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's been great hanging out with you. My name is Taurai Jack, and I've been hanging out with Elize. She's my co-host when it comes to legal, and she's my business partner. And we do this all the time, talking about anything and everything around property, but also what is the learning that we can think about. If you've got any learnings that you have seen that we haven't pointed out in the comments below, drop them in and let's talk about it. The whole idea is, what can we learn? No slaying, no black slaying on anyone else. This is a clean environment. We like, if you do say anything bad, I'm gonna delete you and block you, and like that. What is the learning? We're all human beings, number one. Number two, we are all in business. Stuff can go wrong at some point. But the point here is, what can we learn? How can we get protected? And if this is something that excites you and you're wanting to learn more, you need to subscribe. Hit that subscription button. Cheers. God bless. Goodbye.
Bye.